Respectfully, Brittney Griner was in a Russian prison. You would think that somebody who is now free, back in America on home soil, would not have too much to complain about.
Brittney Griner just had a complete meltdown after Stephen A. Smith absolutely destroyed her for making racial comments about Caitlin Clark. The Russian prison survivor thought she could play the race card about crowd noise, but Stephen A. reminded her about some uncomfortable truths she apparently forgot. The comeback was so brutal that Griner lost her mind completely, which was more embarrassing for Griner, getting called out for her racial comments or having Stephen A. remind her about the Russian prison rescue. Brittney Griner just experienced the most public humiliation of her entire career. It's absolutely beautiful to watch. After making some completely tone-deaf comments about racial undertones and crowd reactions during WNBA games, Stephen A. Smith decided to deliver a reality check that sent Griner into a complete tailspin. The meltdown that followed was so spectacular it deserves its own highlight reel.
Yeah, she says right there, watch this. Every time we play her, there's this commotion, like this loud rumbling from the stands. Turns out it's people, thousands of them, just sitting there watching on purpose. It's very disruptive. She says WNBA games used to be a chill, quiet place. You could bring your laptop and relax, maybe even get a little work done. But now it's like there's large gatherings of people watching us from the stands. Some of them are yelling crazy shit about what they're seeing, putting unfair pressure on us to score, like we're there for their entertainment. You are. The whole thing is toxic. I saw a guy with his daughter in the crowd, both of them yelling, couldn't hear what they were saying exactly, but it was either my performance or some light racism.
But here, let's start with what actually happened, because the sequence of events is crucial to understanding why Griner's reaction was so unhinged. During a recent interview, Griner complained about the increased crowd noise and fan engagement that Caitlin Clark has brought to the WNBA. She specifically mentioned seeing a father and daughter cheering in the stands and assumed their enthusiasm was either about a performance or some light racism. That phrase, light racism, is what set everything in motion. Griner used it to describe fans being excited about basketball games. Think about that for a second. A professional athlete looked at people cheering during sporting events and immediately assumed racial motivations. That level of paranoia and victim mentality is exactly what Stephen A. Smith couldn't let slide.
Respectfully, Brittney Griner was in a Russian prison. You would think that somebody who is now free, back in America on home soil, would not have too much to complain about. Especially something like this. Fans in every sport. She described the fans.
Yeah.
When Stephen A. got wind of Griner's comments, he didn't hold back. He reminded everyone that Griner was literally rescued from a Russian prison not too long ago through a prisoner exchange that involved releasing Victor Bout, an arms dealer nicknamed the Merchant of Death, who was convicted of conspiracy to kill Americans. The United States government traded a convicted terrorist to bring Griner home, and her response to freedom is complaining about crowd noise.
When you clearly she's not remembering who they let out to get her back.
The Merchant of Death.
The Merchant of Death. An arms dealer that wanted to kill American citizens, according to the reports. That's who they let out. For her.
The comparison Stephen A. made was absolutely devastating. Here's someone who experienced actual oppression, actual limitations on freedom, actual consequences for her actions, and she's using that platform to complain about Americans being excited during basketball games. The level of ingratitude and tone deafness was so obvious that even Griner supporters couldn't defend her position. But here's where Griner's reaction became completely unhinged. Instead of acknowledging the valid point Stephen A. raised or showing any gratitude for her situation, she doubled down on the victim narrative and started attacking Stephen A. personally. She accused him of not understanding her experience, dismissed his analysis as ignorant, and basically had a public meltdown because someone dared to challenge her worldview.
This is insane. Let me read you the ticket prices. after Caitlin Clark's been hurt for 2 weeks. All right? So let's go through this. Caitlin Clark absence is having an immediate impact beyond the court. According to data shared by Yahoo Sports via TickPick, prices for 2 specific Indiana Fever away games against the Chicago Sky and the Washington Mystics dropped.
The irony of Griner's reaction is absolutely perfect. She complained about crowd noise being disruptive to her ability to play basketball, but then she created way more noise and distraction through her own comments and subsequent meltdown than any crowd ever could. She became the very thing she was complaining about, a disruptive force that takes attention away from the actual game. Stephen A's analysis went deeper than just the prison rescue angle, though that was certainly the most brutal part of his commentary. He also pointed out how Griner's complaints reveal a fundamental misunderstanding of what professional sports entertainment is supposed to be. Fans don't pay money to sit quietly and politely applaud. They pay to express their emotions, cheer for great plays, and create atmosphere. The fact that Griner found crowd enthusiasm disruptive shows how disconnected she's become from the reality of professional athletics. In every other sport, players feed off crowd energy and use it to elevate their performance. But Griner was treating fan engagement like an inconvenience rather than an opportunity to showcase her abilities on a bigger stage. Griner's meltdown also revealed how unprepared some WNBA players were for mainstream attention. For 25 years, they operated in a bubble where criticism was minimal, expectations were low, and accountability was practically non-existent. Caitlin Clark's arrival brought real scrutiny, real pressure, and real consequences for performance, and some players clearly weren't ready for that adjustment. The racial aspect of Griner's original comments was particularly problematic because it assumed the worst possible motivations from fans who were simply excited about basketball. The assumption that father-daughter pairs cheering at games must be engaging in racism shows a worldview that's actively looking for problems rather than appreciating opportunities. Stephen A. didn't let that slide either. He pointed out how dangerous it is when public figures casually throw around accusations of racism without any evidence or context. It diminishes the impact of addressing actual racial issues and creates division where none needs to exist. Griner's casual use of light racism to describe crowd noise was exactly the kind of irresponsible rhetoric that Stephen A. has spent his career challenging. The meltdown that followed Stephen A.'s commentary was everything you'd expect from someone who's never been held accountable for their statements. Griner went on social media, made multiple defensive posts, and basically confirmed every criticism about her mentality and approach to professional sports. Instead of reflecting on the valid points raised, she attacked the messenger and played the victim. What made Griner's reaction even more embarrassing was the timing. Her meltdown happened right as the WNBA is experiencing unprecedented growth in popularity and revenue, largely due to Caitlin Clark's impact. Instead of embracing the opportunity that increased attention provides, Griner was complaining about the very thing that's making her and every other WNBA player more money than they've ever made. The prison rescue angle that Stephen A. brought up was particularly effective because it highlighted the stark contrast between Griner's experience behind bars and her current complaints about American basketball fans. Someone who truly understood what she went through should be celebrating every moment of freedom, every opportunity to compete, and every fan who chooses to spend money watching her play. Griner's inability to show gratitude for her rescue and return to professional basketball reveals a level of entitlement that's honestly shocking. The United States government literally negotiated with terrorists to secure her freedom, and her response was complain about the noise level at basketball games. That kind of perspective shows how disconnected she's become from reality. The meltdown also exposed how thin-skinned Griner really is when faced with legitimate criticism. Stephen A. wasn't attacking her personally or making unfair accusations. He was pointing out objective facts about her situation and challenging her complaints with reasonable counterarguments. But instead of engaging with those points, Griner responded emotionally and defensively. The comparison to other professional athletes was particularly damaging to Griner's position. Stephen A. pointed out that players in the NBA, NFL, MLB, and NHL all deal with hostile road environments and passionate fans as part of their job. Nobody else in professional sports complains about crowd noise the way Griner did, which makes her comments seem even more out of touch. What made the situation worse for Griner was that Stephen A. wasn't alone in his criticism. Other media personalities, former players, and even some current WNBA players started questioning her comments and approach. The meltdown that followed showed she wasn't prepared to handle widespread criticism of her victim mentality. The racial dynamics that Griner tried to inject into the conversation were particularly problematic because they distracted from legitimate discussions about the WNBA's growth and success. Instead of celebrating increased fan engagement and revenue, she was looking for problems and grievances where none existed. Stephen A's response to Griner's meltdown was perfect because he didn't back down or apologize for making valid points. He doubled down on his analysis and provided even more context about why her complaints were so tone-deaf. That kind of consistent messaging forced Griner to confront the weakness of her position rather than hiding behind victim narratives. The broader WNBA community's reaction to this whole situation was telling. Most players and coaches stayed quiet rather than defending Griner's comments, which suggests they understood how problematic her position really was. The lack of support for her racial accusations showed that even her peers recognized she'd gone too far. Griner's meltdown also highlighted the difference between legitimate criticism and manufactured grievances. Stephen A. was addressing real issues with her comments and approach, while Griner was creating problems where none existed. The contrast between substantive analysis and emotional reaction was obvious to everyone watching. The timing of this whole controversy was particularly bad for Griner because it happened during a period when the WNBA desperately needs positive attention and mainstream acceptance. Her complaints about fan engagement and casual racism accusations were exactly the kind of negativity that could drive away the casual fans the league needs to maintain its growth. Stephen A's analysis also touched on a broader issue of athlete accountability in the social media age. Griner's comments weren't made in a private conversation. They were public statements that deserved public scrutiny. The fact that she melted down when faced with that scrutiny shows how unprepared she was for the consequences of her words. The prison rescue context that Stephen A. kept emphasizing was particularly effective because it provided a concrete example of how much support Griner has received from the very country she was now criticizing. The contrast between international diplomacy, securing her freedom, and her complaints about domestic basketball fans was stark and undeniable. Griner's reaction also revealed how social media can amplify and extend controversies that might have blown over quickly in previous eras. Instead of letting Stephen A's criticism fade away, her defensive posts and emotional reactions kept the story alive and made her look worse with each additional comment. The most damaging aspect of Griner's meltdown was how it confirmed every negative stereotype about entitled athletes who can't handle criticism. Instead of showing maturity, accountability, or perspective, she doubled down on victim narratives and attacked anyone who questioned her approach. Stephen A's consistent messaging throughout this controversy was particularly effective because he stuck to facts and objective analysis rather than personal attacks. He let Griner's own words and reactions speak for themselves while providing context that made her position look even more unreasonable. The broader implications of this controversy extend beyond just one player's comments. It highlighted the tension between the WNBA's desire for mainstream attention and some players' comfort with low-stakes, low-pressure environments. Griner's complaints represented exactly the kind of mindset that kept the league irrelevant for 25 years. The meltdown also showed how unprepared some players are for the kind of scrutiny that comes with genuine stardom and cultural relevance. Caitlin Clark has demonstrated how to handle pressure and criticism professionally, while Griner's reaction showed the opposite approach: defensive, emotional, and counterproductive. What made Griner's reaction even more embarrassing was that she created a much bigger controversy through her meltdown than Stephen A's original criticism would have generated. If she had simply ignored the comments or responded professionally, the story would have disappeared quickly. Instead, her emotional reaction turned into a multi-day news cycle. The prison rescue angle will probably follow Griner for the rest of her career now, thanks to her inability to show appropriate gratitude and perspective. Stephen A. made sure that connection was permanently established in the public consciousness, and Griner's meltdown only reinforced the point about her lack of appreciation. The most satisfying aspect of this whole situation was watching someone finally hold Griner accountable for tone-deaf comments without backing down when she tried to play victim. Stephen A. refused to let her hide behind racial grievances or defensive deflection, which forced her to confront the weakness of her actual arguments. That Griner's meltdown essentially proved every point Stephen A. made about her mentality and approach to professional sports. Instead of demonstrating growth, accountability, or perspective, she confirmed that she's exactly the kind of entitled athlete who complains about success rather than embracing opportunity. The lasting impact of this controversy will probably be that Griner becomes known more for her inability to handle criticism than for any basketball achievements. Her meltdown overshadowed any positive contributions she might make to the sport and established her as someone who creates problems rather than solving them. Brittney Griner just learned why you never try to play victim with Stephen A. Smith. Her racial comments backfired spectacularly, and the meltdown that followed was pure entertainment. The Russian prison rescue angle was absolutely brutal, but completely necessary. Hit that like button if you think Stephen A. was right, and subscribe for more accountability moments.